Yeah, that just want to introduce Anna and Sasha. We're going to talk a little bit of what's going on with the vocabulary team, and with the ways we as a community interact with the vocabularies. So this is important, since this is a resource that affects everybody. You may want to pay attention and listen and ask questions. It's not the last time there's communication. You can engage always in communication, or even come to the vocabulary working group and get involved. So Anna and Sasha are going to explain to you what's happening. We have talked about this already, so there's nothing drastically new from what you've heard so far. But if you haven't heard, they're going to tell you what's happening with the vocabularies and how this is going to be managed, and what you as a community are going to have interaction with. I have to shut up now because I'm in a station.
Thanks so much, Christian. So to give you an overview and the introduction for today's talk, in 2023, we focused on improving vocabularies, and the community really grew tremendously over the years. OHDSI is now being used across different countries for all sorts of use cases, and vocabulary as the backbone of OHDSI is now also need to meet community needs. Vocabularies need to be transparent, well documented, easy to use, and reliable. And above everything else, we want the community to be able to incorporate their content and changes quickly. And for a solution to be scalable, we truly need to work together in a collaborative mode, so then this product, the vocabularies, represent the community and meet the community needs. And the talk will focus at those points. We will start with discussing what the community's needs are. We will talk about the landscape assessment. We will now then follow with the improvement process and vocabulary committee. The third part of this talk will focus on the roadmap and releases, and we will finish up with the community involvement, how you can get involved, how you can contribute. And as we said, vocabularies are being increasingly used. We have more than 30 working groups. We have more than, I think, 30 countries that adopted OHDSI. And we wanted to conduct a formal assessment of how people use vocabularies. What does the community need? And for that, we created 2 questionnaires that we distributed in January, February of this year. We tried to get as many answers as possible, so we communicated through various channels, through Teams, forums, emails, and we had 2 parts, the overall and the data source specific. And the questions we asked was basically how you use vocabularies, how you use them in your ETL, in your research, in your development, what vocabularies exactly you use, what kind of problems you encountered with the vocabularies. And we looked at the different axes. We looked at the completeness. For example, is there any content that is missing in the vocabularies? We look at the correctness. Have you encountered any errors in the mappings and the content and the hierarchies? We looked at the recency and updates. Are vocabularies released too often or not too often? Have you had any problems with the versions, with the upload, with the download? And of course, we asked you what you would like to see improved. And we published a draft which was open for the community feedback in March, April. And now we have the final form. I want to thank everybody who looked at the document, who commented on that. And I encourage everybody to look at the file that is located in Teams and General in Files. Also, the link is on the bottom, because this is a very interesting resource that I think provides a lot of the insights, and I will talk about a couple of them here. So first of all, we got more than 180 responses. And of course, it does not cover everybody in the community, but I feel pretty proud about this number because first, it's a large number, and second, the fact that it covers more than 140 institutions gives us the confidence that, in fact, we capture different stakeholders, we capture different perspectives. And when you look at the second part, which was database specific, you can see here that we covered 60 data sources, which I think is the largest number of the data sources that participated in any study in Odyssey. And of course, we want this number to continue growing. And if you look at the findings, first of all, 87% of the community feel confident about the vocabulary's integrity. Well, this number, while promising, of course, needs to be treated with caution. And we want to use this number as the benchmark for the future studies. We want to conduct the next assessments to assess how well we are doing with our activities, and we will be using this number to compare to. Then, of course, we looked at the vocabularies that are used in research and data. And just to remind you, we have more than 140 vocabularies right now in the Odyssey vocabularies. And when you look at the table to your right, in fact, there were plenty of vocabularies that were used in less than 10% of research or 10% of the data. So in fact, the majority of those 140 vocabularies correlate with the minority of the impact on the community. So we treated these findings as an opportunity to rebalance our activities so that we'll focus on the vocabularies that bring the most value to the community and have the most impact. And when we talk about the specific vocabularies that are most commonly used, there are sort of all the usual suspects. If it's condition domain, it's SNOMED, all sorts of flavors of ICD, ICD-10, ICD-9 international versions, ICD-03, MEDRA. Then, of course, it's drugs, RxNorm, ATC, RxNorm extension as the targets in the Odyssey vocabularies, and of course, procedural vocabularies and cancer vocabularies. So really, this list of the most commonly used vocabularies will be linked to the activities that we will talk about later, but essentially we used this knowledge to prioritize our activities regarding the maintenance and improvement of the vocabularies. And then when we looked at the recency, essentially recency and updates, essentially most of the community updates their data either annually or semi-annually, which we then used in our release planning. And of course, there are multiple areas for improvement, so to speak. One of the common topics that community brought up was transparent release schedule. The community wants to be able to estimate how the new releases will impact their research in ETL. They would like to see version control. Also, they would like, of course, to see more robust and transparent quality assurance and control procedures, which is natural. And we used this landscape also as an opportunity to collect all of the issues and problems and errors that you guys encountered with the vocabularies. Another area is to increase coverage, both in terms of the vocabularies captured, which ties back to the community contribution, and also see more comprehensive hierarchies in Odyssey vocabularies. And the very common topic always is more documentation, more educational materials, some easy to digest materials that are easy to grasp, more documentation regarding specific vocabularies, and in general, more documentation. And that's a lot of tasks. So one of the things we did was establishing a vocabulary committee. Now, I don't think that anybody of you needs introduction to the people you see on the screen. They're very well known. They represent OHDSI, they represent different stakeholders, they represent different parts of the world. And this vocabulary committee meets on the regular basis and oversees the improvement activities and helps the vocabulary team to prioritize the activities that we plan. And of course, the output and decisions of the committee are communicated to the community, and we've been doing that for this whole year. Now, we established the plan, and the process improvement activities, and I think you've seen this slide multiple times already, has different areas that we want to improve upon, that we want to work on. And here we specifically will focus on the first 3 bullet points on this list, but of course the whole list is what we will be working on this year, next year, and so on and so forth. So we covered the landscape assessment, and the other parts are the roadmap and release schedule and documentation, or specifically the community contribution related documentation. And with that, I want to move on to the roadmap and pass it on to Sasha.
Thank you, Anna. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, thanks. So I think that is the first time I'm talking to this wide audience. So let me briefly introduce myself. Some of the folks know me as Sasha, some others know Alex only, but that is eventually the same person. My name is Alexander Davydov. I work for Odysseus as the lead of the vocabulary team. So let's start looking at the vocabulary roadmap and how we designed it. And then next slide, please. If you're looking for the relevant information on the vocabulary release schedule, the wiki of the vocabulary repository and the GitHub would be the right place to go. Apart from the actual roadmap Gantt chart you've seen in the last slide, we also publish the following things. The first one is the general principles of the release planning. Then we have a listed activities per each vocabulary release. The specific vocabulary versions to be included within the further releases, and the names of the responsible folks for the respective activities. In addition to that, we describe here the improvement activities that are planned for the further releases. First principle that we used in the planning of the roadmap is a stable cadence of releases, which enables more transparency and allows users to plan their activities better. This is actually a big change. There are no longer multiple releases during the year. There are only 2 releases per year, which actually connects to the landscape assessment results, where users said that they update the data annually or biannually, meaning semi-annually. If you need something from us, make sure it's communicated at least 2 months before the actual release. Otherwise, you will need to wait for 6 months or even more. Unfortunately, there are no exceptions. It may sound a bit scary, but in fact, 6 months time is what it used to be. Urgent releases require quite some time and disrupted our workflow previously in the past. So these changes introduce more structure so that we save the resources, and this way we'll be using these resources more effectively. Here is the content for the next 3 releases, which are August this year, winter next year, and summer next year. As you can see, based on the landscape assessment results, we planned machinery and content improvement activities. We picked 3 vocabularies: SNOMED, ICD-10 family, and MEDRA, as well as ATC, the first one, as the most commonly used vocabularies for which the problems were reported by the users. As a result of the improvement, we will deliver more stable and better quality content in the future. According to the roadmap, here is a list of the vocabularies and their maintenance status. Green ones are supported by the vocabulary team, so their periodic refreshes are added to the roadmap. Black ones are obsolete, which actually means that they either not needed or not maintained by the source, so therefore not needed in OMOP. So we don't need to worry about them. We just leave them on the list because we don't throw things away. The red ones are most important because they are not supported. And we identified a couple of categories among them, such as oncology-related vocabularies, which include genomic vocabularies as well. Source vocabularies, which contain non-standard concepts mostly, and the standard and classification vocabularies. Please spend some time to check whether your vocabulary is in the red zone. We're not going to remove them, but if you want something to happen with them, you need to help us with this. These are exactly those vocabularies that should be done by the community within the community contribution process. And let me hand it over back to Anna, who will tell you more about how this is going to happen.
Thanks so much, Sasha. So as we said, we identified the list of the vocabularies that we want to focus our attention on so that we can deliver quality content to the majority of the users. Now, of course, there are all of the other vocabularies that are not on the roadmap. And of course, you may have a question of, well, I need this vocabulary. What do I do to make sure that it is refreshed, or what do I do with the other needs of mine? And for that, we are establishing and rolling out the community contribution. It will be rolled out in two parts. And the first part, which we will focus on today, focuses on the use cases that can be incorporated through filling the templates. And I will show you the use cases on the next slide. And we created the documentation at GitHub. There is a link. I've seen in the chat that some of the links, especially to Teams, do not work, which is unfortunate, but we will also post all of the full links later on in the chat, and also the slides will be made available. So we created the documentation, we created the templates, and we created a pipeline. And first, I want to talk about the use cases that are supported in this part one that we are rolling out right now. Essentially, we can split these use cases into two buckets. The first bucket is adding new content. The second bucket is modifying existing content. Adding new content does not impact the rest of the community to a larger extent because you're adding something that you want or need. And therefore, these use cases and changes can be incorporated rather quickly because they do not require an extensive review. And the use cases that we support in this bucket is adding non-standard concepts to existing vocabularies, or adding synonyms, of course, adding new mappings, and also adding new non-standard vocabularies, which we know a lot of people in the community are interested in. Then on the other hand, modifying existing content does impact community, as this content is already used by others. So therefore, if you want to change something that is already in the vocabularies, somebody needs to review it. That means that the vocabulary team needs to review it, and also other working groups or a broader community need to come together and discuss whether those changes introduce any disruption into their research. And this bucket includes modifying existing mappings, something that a lot of people are interested in, changing the mappings, maybe fixing the errors that they observed, modifying concept attributes. You can think of, oh, I want to change this domain or something like this, and promoting non-standard concepts to standard. So you can see that on your left side, you have adding non-standard concepts and adding non-standard vocabularies. So in case you want to add a term that you think uniquely represents some sort of semantic meaning and therefore should be standard, you will first go through the process of adding non-standard terms and then promoting them to standard. In this way, we can have clean pipelines and we can incorporate those, incorporate that new content quickly. And then if you want to promote the terms to standard, that will be the modification, and that will need to go through the review because again, that may impact the community. And I think one of the use cases that should be specific, that should be of a specific interest to the community is adding non-standard vocabularies. Because according to the landscape assessment, there are multiple local terminologies that people keep somewhere in their schemas, use source to concept map, use the other approaches, and do some sort of mappings on their side. So we want to make sure that adding those vocabularies is a seamless and easy process, as seamless as possible. So if you have any new vocabularies that you want to add, or mappings, or other non-standard terms, please contribute. And now we will talk about how you can do that.
Anna, if just based on the chat that I know that you can't see,
Sure.
The use cases you've just outlined are adding new content and modifying existing content. I see that lots of people are already asking about how they can participate in refreshing content. So could you just describe how a refresh can be conceived of as a combination of adding new content and modifying existing content, even though you're not explicitly saying that?
Sure, absolutely. And thanks so much for asking that, because I cannot see the screen, the questions indeed. So I think there are actually there are two flavors of this question. I think the first flavor is, what if I want to add my source vocabulary and then refresh it? In that case, the refreshes are fully covered within this first part, so you will be able to fill the templates and get your content refreshed. And the refresh essentially is the combination of this, potentially is the combination of these two buckets. So a refresh can be simply adding new terms that were released, maybe new drugs, or maybe new condition or lab test codes. In that case, when you want to refresh a vocabulary, you will fill the template for adding non-standard concepts with their mappings, and will give this template to us. In case a refresh also means that you want to change something, for example, change mappings in your vocabulary, you discovered an error or something like this, then you will also fill the template for modifying existing mappings, and will go through the same process as I will describe later on in the pipeline. So essentially, depending on what your refresh is about, it will be some of the items, some of the use cases on the screen, or a combination of thereof. Now, another flavor of this question is, what if I want to refresh the vocabulary that is already in the OHDSI vocabularies? For example, I want to refresh SNOMED veterinary, or I want to refresh READ, or I want to refresh something else. Well, there the question will depend on how complex that vocabulary is and whether we have any existing machinery to process it systematically. So if you want to refresh something that is already in the vocabularies, please come and talk to us and we will develop the solutions with you. This is something that we're planning to cover in part 2, but while we're all waiting for that, you can just come to us and talk to us and we will figure out a way to move together. And that would be either also fill in the templates or maybe writing code, or maybe in the case of complex use cases, spending your time in understanding our machinery and building something on top of that. So I would say at this current stage, it's case-by-case basis, but we know you will have questions like that, so do not hesitate to reach out and we will figure out the best way for us together to move forward with your need. And I will also touch on that later on the slides. Patrick, are there any other questions as it relates to this?
Yeah, I think you keep going and then we'll come back to some of the broader issues.
Okay, sounds good. So the pipeline will look as follows. I think a lot of people are already familiar with the vocabulary GitHub. So you will start, once you know what you want, you will create an issue on the GitHub. And we added 2 categories of issues that represent these 2 buckets, add content and modify content. And when you go to the issues, the body of the issue also goes back to the directions and what to do, just in case you cannot memorize this slide right here, right now. When you create an issue, you will describe your use case and what you want to contribute. In this way, if somebody else is working on the same problem, we can connect you. And also it will allow us to provide some comments and suggestions in case they are needed. So the very first point is just go on the GitHub, create an issue, describe what you want to do. Then you would choose the template that corresponds to your use case. There are 7 use cases, there are 7 templates, very easy. The templates have the actual tables to populate. They also have the metadata that we want to collect about the contributions. Think the date, your name, email, and additional metadata elements for the relationships if you're creating new mappings or if you modify new mappings. And of course, it also has the checklist. So if you go and want to contribute, we want to make sure that some of the basic quality assurance rules are met. Therefore, we created a checklist that you will need to fill after you're done with filling the templates. And the templates themselves also have the instructions on how to fill each field in the tables. Then you will submit those templates, those filled templates. And if a review is needed, for example, if it's modifying existing content, you will come to a review session. Based on the content, we will determine whether broader working group involvement is needed. Like maybe there are other working groups that would like to discuss your proposed contribution. Maybe it's common data model working group or other working groups. So you will come to a review session and then we'll modify and re-upload your templates if needed. And then the last step is to see your contribution in the release. As Sasha said, we're taking the contributions that are submitted at least 2 months prior to the release. And this 2 months window is coming from the fact that we need to spend the last months before the release we need to spend the last months we will be spending last months before the release making sure that the content is good, that we write the documentation, that we perform QA/QC, and therefore we essentially need to put our pencils down and freeze the release so that it's quality content. And for this specific release for August, that essentially means that we're collecting the contributions through the month of June. And we're very much eager to get whatever you want to give us, collect everything that you want in this month, and of course help you with formatting, answer all sorts of your questions. So do not be intimidated by this short span. If you have something, please go ahead, please go on the GitHub, create your issue, and we will talk with you through that. And basically this touches on what people have been asking in the chat, is that if your use cases are clearly supported on the slides that I showed, which is adding non-standard terms, adding non-standard vocabularies, adding mappings, adding synonyms, or changing mappings, promoting non-standard to standard, or changing the attributes of the concepts, go ahead, submit a GitHub issue with a brief description of your contribution, and we will together go through the process, and we will do dry runs in the month of June. Now, if you see that your use cases is not yet supported, or maybe it's not necessarily clear whether it's supported, just talk to us. You can go on forums, you can send us an email, you can come to the vocabulary working group call. We know that you will have questions, and we want to work with you together to answer all of them and make sure that your contribution is covered, if not now, then in future, and we have a clear way on working through your needs. And when we think about what comes next, well, as I said, we are gathering the requests for contributions throughout this month by the end of June, so please submit your issues. Then on the next working group call on June 13, we will discuss any questions that you might have. So please come. I sent the meeting invite yesterday that went out to the whole Common Data Model Working Group. So in case you haven't received that, please ping me. We will add you to the working group so that you will have those invites in your calendars. Also, if you do not want to receive those invites, please also let me know. And as we are moving through the community contribution, we also should not forget about the quality assurance and control improvements, and that is the next step on our roadmap. This is something that we are working on right now, and will be working in the next couple of months. And that concludes my presentation. You have the links. Hopefully, at least some of them are working. I always struggle with the team links, but if there are any questions in the group, we will be happy to answer them now. Let me maybe also go to the chat to see if there's anything else.
So
Melanie's got her hand raised.
Yeah, there's definitely questions in the chat, but let's go with hands raised for now. If you had a question in the chat, let's raise hands and have a conversation. So Melanie, why don't you start?
Hi, thank you very much for this presentation. I'm very excited about this. So I'm just curious for like EHR data, we have a lot of custom mappings, lab results being a huge one for social history, flow sheets, etc. So will we be able to submit our mappings for these, and then we'll be able to download it in Athena?
Well, the mappings need to be from something to something, right? So if you want to add those terms from your source vocabularies in, you will also be able to add the mappings for them, of course. Then with the flow sheets, it's to me, it's a slightly harder question because flow sheets are usually non-controlled. It just, from what I think it is, it's a bunch of strings, right? In which case, it's not really a vocabulary, right? So we will need to look through the examples and see if they can be incorporated in the vocabularies in a meaningful way. Like, do they have codes? do they have names? Do they have any sort of structure, or it's really just a bunch of strings together, if that makes sense?
Right. Yeah. So like things like lab results and social history and flow sheets are just only, unfortunately, strings. They don't come with codes. So we have to map positive. So we take something like positive, I give it a 2 billion concept ID, and then I map it to the standard concept for positive. So I have all these mappings with their my custom vocabulary of, you know, UC Health. So would those be incorporated, or is it more, or is this more for non-truly custom vocabularies? Does that question make sense?
Yeah, no, it does make a lot of sense. I think the original use case that we thought of was for truly source vocabularies, like Z-index. It's just the example that have been floating around for a while. But also, you know, you can think about those terms from the perspective of whether you think incorporation of them will add benefit to a larger community, right? So if your flow sheets is something that only you use, probably doesn't make that much sense to incorporate them in the vocabularies, because now you just have this additional step of downloading this vocabulary and mappings and doing something with them. And if you want to modify something, you need to go through a review. So if you're using them and you think you're using them only for yourself, I think there is less sense in incorporating them simply from the workflow perspective. But if you think that this content will be of use for other people in the community, then I think see a direct value of incorporating this in the vocabularies, simply because we think that other people will benefit from this mappings, from these concepts, and so on and so forth. So maybe an answer to that is that we need to come to your working group and talk more about the flow sheets and see if there is a appetite for such mappings across the community. If that makes sense.
Thank you.
Melanie.
Yes, thank you, Anna. I'll send you an invite.
Dima.
Hello. So actually, I was wanted to comment, but Anna covered it. So it's actually the whole new thing. Like, I imagine that people have to map the same things over and over again, because, you know, I encounter positive and I do the manual mapping and map it to positive. Someone who works in Odysseus encounter positive word and map it to positive, right? Someone who works in Hive, and everybody does the same job again and again, right? Well, I don't do it again and again if I already met it, but I mean, different organizations do the same things, right? And we kind of wasting time. So it would be really good to have the pool of those things mapped, right? And it will be open for the community. So yeah, I think you start talking about that already. So I mean, but I think we need to support it more, like not just piled up and forget about that, but like make a separate effort for that, so people don't spend time doing the same work in different organizations.
Yeah, that is true. I mean, not only spend their time working on the same things, but also that's the question of consistency, right?
Yeah, and equality. Yeah.
On the same problems, probably they would benefit from a shared resource. No, I think it's in general a big problem that people work separately on the same problems. So what we want, that actually connects back to your question and Melanie's question, we really want people to submit their requests and issues on the GitHub so that we can get a better understanding of what people want and ready to contribute and what they're working on. And in this way, if enough people come to the GitHub and post their issues, we will have, by the end of June, we will have a better understanding of what people are interested in and whether there are great overlaps in what they're working on. But I think in general, this, yeah, as you said, a separate initiative that focuses on that would probably be beneficial, but I don't think we have a readily available solution on how to bring people together and get them to share their work in general.
Yeah.
Asya.
Oh yeah, I'd like to comment that mapping, sharing mapping. We have thought about this in the ontology world for some time, and there are thoughts on there is an ontology for mapping because mapping is complicated. Yeah, and the Vera can say more. But it will be really helpful to have something that can be shared with the community because sometimes people just do the same mapping again and again and again. Of course, different like entities may see mapping differently, but I think this kind of resource will be helpful. Yeah, I'm over.
Thank you,
just
Asya.
want,
Go ahead. Sorry, Anna.
I saw people. Yeah, I saw people raising their hands. I just want to comment quickly on what I've seen in the chat. People discussing non-standard versus standard and how non-standard terms are used in lieu of standard for the portion of the community. I think one of the challenges that we've seen so far is that people may want to be very clean about using standard terms as it's supposed to be in the standard fields and using the standard terminologies and concepts in in Odyssey, but what may stop them is that incorporating their vocabularies is not an easy, seamless, and quick process. So they're like, oh, I have this vocabulary, I would like to put it in, but it's not that easy, and I don't know when it will get in, right? Or maybe I saw some errors in the mappings, and therefore I'm not going to use SNOMED, I'm going to use ICD-10 terms for my research. Well, this is what I think this pipeline is about, the community contribution pipeline, is that we want people to use the standard terms and do research on the standard terms so we can do network studies, so we can speak one language. And for that, we need to make sure that wherever you want to get in can be incorporated quickly. And if you find errors, they also can be fixed so that you will use the standard terms and not the non-standard terms. I think this is precisely what this new approach is about.
Tavera, go ahead.
So first of all, I think, super excited about all this work. Very, very nicely done and presented. And I cannot congratulate you more for getting this done and then rolling this out to the community. I have a little bit different kind of question to ask. So one of the things we talked about in the past was the necessity for having versions of the OMOP vocabulary. And alongside that, then versions, have available versions of prior releases so that people can unroll and understand, what the semantics are behind their current or prior implementations are. Can you make a little comment about the utilization of any updated versioning process?
Yeah, absolutely. So in this grand plan of the improvement activities that we have, you can actually see that vocabulary version is number 5, and which is not the order, but it is on the list. And as we saw in the landscape assessment, a lot of people do indeed comment on like availability of different versions, and they want to be able to compare changes and figure out whether they want a new release to begin with. And there are actually a couple of parts to this question, I think. The first is simple, right? Will we make version control available? Will we make different versions available? This is something that is on the list, which means that we want to work on that. When we will get to it, that's another good question that obviously requires some technical. There is a technical side to it, which means that we need to have the proper infrastructure for it. But given that there's been an interest and appetite for it, it's definitely in the list of the planned activities. Then the second part of the question, which I'm not sure you asked about, but I want to cover it in general, is that we also saw in the landscape assessment that people, in fact, are interested in looking how vocabulary changes and changes between two different versions impact their activities, how it impacts their ETL, how it impacts their research. And I think so far we've been thinking that there should be some tools that would help the community in estimating those changes. For example, Dima Demshitz on this call, I know, is actively working on the problems of estimating the vocabulary changes and their impact. So if anybody is interested in that aspect, I would invite you to come to the working group so that we can connect you to the right people who are already working on this problem, so that it's going to be a truly collaborative effort. And also, share the ideas, which is always very useful.